everyone, how are we doing? I hope you're doing well. We're going to jump right into it today because we're talking about something that I actually care quite a bit about, and that is bisexuality. Well, specifically, bisexual erasure and stigma, and how these can have a really negative impact on the health of bisexuals. So let's just jump into it. So, bisexuality. It actually has a really long history. Ancient Greek and Japanese societies actually encouraged bisexuality in their male warriors, encouraging them to take lovers within their regiment and also to take wives. One was to reproduce, and the other was to facilitate the transfer of knowledge and experience from older generations to younger generations of soldiers. There have also been cases of prominent bisexual women throughout history, two notable examples being Alice Dunbar Nelson, who was a mixed-race bisexual woman born in New Orleans in 1875, and Vita Sackville West, who was famously involved with Virginia Woolf in the early 1900s during her open marriage to Harold Wilson. Just as bisexuality has a really long history, so does the stigma and erasure that surrounds the sexual orientation. There are several phenomena that contribute to the stigma and erasure that surround the sexual orientation, but today we're going to be focusing on media representation, performative bisexuality, and unconscious assumptions about sexuality, and how these in turn can create an environment which allows the proliferation of negative health outcomes for bisexual people. Representation of bisexuality in the media, such as in films like Scott Pilgrim vs. the World or TV shows like Friends, creates a feedback loop of stereotypes and assumptions that are linked to bisexuality. Media uses common stereotypes about bisexuals in order to build characters, which in turn reinforces these stereotypes within society as the media is consumed. In Scott Pilgrim and Friends, bisexuality is represented as a phase characters go through, which reinforces the stereotype that bisexuality is just a transitional sexuality through which people can experiment with queer identities before either coming out as gay or deciding that they are straight. Now, this is particularly harmful for bisexual people because people stop actually legitimizing the sexual orientation in of itself, expecting someone to come out as a different sexual orientation later on. And this doesn't just occur with the just a phase stereotype, but also with the assumptions that bisexuals are greedy, hypersexual, more prone to infidelity, and indecisive. Performative bisexuality, while not innately harmful, can also help contribute to the stigma and erasure that surrounds the sexual orientation. The performance of bisexual activity due to external pressures or to impress someone that you like can help reinforce the idea that people who engage with both genders are doing so only for attention and not because of their sexual orientation. Unconscious assumptions about sexuality are often made from social cues, such as who an individual shows interest in at any given time. This often leads bisexual people to be miscategorized as either gay or straight depending on the gender of their current partner. Now, this happens quite a bit in media. Characters such as Clark Griffin from The 100 and Elliot Perlman from Call Me By Your Name are ultimately often characterized as gay. This is due to the main love interest within the plot also being of the same gender. However, within their story arcs, both characters have relationships with both men and women. As art reflects reality, those in same-sex relationships are often assumed to be gay, and those with partners of the opposite gender are often assumed to be straight. When bisexuals correct these assumptions, the burden of proof often falls on them to demonstrate their sexuality before it is legitimized in the eyes of their peers. These three separate phenomena collectively contribute to the stigma and erasure that surrounds the sexual orientation. This in turn is thought to contribute to the increased negative health outcomes that can be observed among bisexual demographics. Specifically, higher levels of anxiety, depression, and poor mood are reported amongst bisexual demographics, and bisexual women have the highest rates of reported suicide and suicidal ideation of any sexual minority group. Bisexual women are also more likely to be diagnosed with an STI when compared to any other demographic, are more likely to be sexually victimized when compared to their lesbian counterparts, and are more likely to experience intimate partner violence when compared to their heterosexual peers. These negative health outcomes can be linked to how the erasure and the delegitimization of bisexuality across society causes the burden of proof to fall on bisexuals to legitimize their sexuality in the eyes of their peers. For some, this creates a pressure to engage in specific relationships, even when those relationships might endanger them physically, mentally, and emotionally. It may make people feel as though they can't say no to propositions that they would otherwise refuse, or in general, foster feelings of inadequacy and insecurity due to pressures that are exerted on them during social situations. Negative health outcomes may also be linked to the perception that bisexuals aren't properly queer, as the sexuality is more of a transitional one. This may lead to bisexuals engaging in risky sexual activity, as they feel that asking questions about safe and common sex practices may highlight their inexperience and ignorance surrounding the topic, which in turn may undermine their queer identity. Feeling unable to ask these questions about safe and common sex practices leaves bisexual people vulnerable to STIs and sexual grooming. Alongside this, the belief that bisexuals aren't properly queer could make them feel alienated from other queer people, marginalising them within their own already marginalised group. This in turn could contribute to the incidences of poor mental health that are observed with such high frequency among bisexual demographics. Things aren't all bad, however. In fact, the situation has dramatically improved in recent years. Representation of bisexuality in the media, for one, has dramatically improved, with characters no longer propagating or relying on stereotypes that past ones succumbed to. Shows have built characters who are largely responsible, self-possessed and loyal, like Emma, a protagonist in the show Vida, who openly state, "I am bisexual," as Rosa does in season 5 of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, yet whose characters aren't built around their sexuality, and characters that explore the topics of identity and who struggle with the idea of not being queer enough, as Layla does in The Bisexual. All of which is incredibly important to show people that they aren't alone, and also to reinforce the idea that bisexuals are a multifaceted and diverse group of individuals who aren't defined by the stereotypes that are linked to their sexual orientation. Further work could be done to create a more bisexual inclusive sex education curriculum for younger years in order to help prevent the poor sexual health outcomes that this demographic seem to be specifically vulnerable to. This would also help normalise their sexuality and remove any remaining stigma surrounding it for future generations. I know this has been a bit of a brief overview on the topic, but I really hope that you guys have enjoyed this video on bisexuality, bisexual stigma and erasure, and how it can have a negative impact on the health of bisexuals. I really hope that you've learned something from this, and that in the future we can work together to create a more bisexual and sexuality diverse, inclusive society for everyone to enjoy. Have a nice day, guys, and I hope to see you again soon.